The commentary that I heard and what I saw on CNN earlier nights was watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world in all these outlets. To say that the coverage was pro-revolutionary would be an understatement. To say that there was some kind of corporate tarring of the demonstrators would be wild fantasy.
Well, you're making a very, very important point, but I also have observed this, how different it is. Because what happened this time in Egypt is that hosts and anchors went to Egypt. They were beat up. That from the United States. They were beat up. They were imprisoned. They had their cameras smashed. And suddenly, the very people, the people that they usually turn to when they're here, and I'm saying the voices of power, the Mubarak regime, who they would usually be interviewing, they're the ones who beat them up. And so they, for the first time, did not see them as legitimate. And so you started to see in the mainstream media, the corporate media, they're looking for the very voices that we're broadcasting all the time. I call it trickle-up journalism.
What about Vietnam? What about the press in Vietnam, in particular?
You're taking us backward. We're going to move forward. We're going to move forward. We're going to move on to Sudan next.
We've done some bad things, but don't tar us for everything we've done.
Please.
I think some of the most important news stories that we've gotten recently have not come from the traditional news outlets. The native video has come just organically through the internet, and I think the people have kind of shown that they have the ability to say, we see this, this is important, and we're going to bump it up in importance, and it gets out there within a day.
There is simply too much information to indulge in the fantasy that you can have unfiltered access to everything. The organic movement that you're talking about is a form of filtering in which things that get retweeted, reblogged, passed on, and sort of rise up, that is simply an alternate form of filtering. But don't believe either that we don't need filters or that we could live without them. And I don't think that we should be as naively assuming the quality of the organic filters as we were in the 20th century, when we simply assumed that Walter Cronkite was, when he told us that that's the way it is, that that statement was at all accurate. But now that we know that that statement is nonsense, we shouldn't also imbue that same sense of, oh, therefore it must be true, when looking at our social networks.
Go ahead, Emily.
I just want to say something sort of slightly in defence of our students and also the existing corporate media and of journalism, which is actually being able to relate narrative and data, which is actually going to be a kind of a relatively difficult job. And I thought the WikiLeaks prism of that was a great one, because, as I say, you just saw the future, which is information will come to you in ugly big chunks, and you have to be able to make sense of it, and you have to be able to make people care about it. And actually, you know, you need people who are paid money to spend time with stories to be able to do that, and those are really kind of what professional journalists do.
Please.
So I guess I'm curious about the role that you think the internet and social media will have moving forward. I mean, obviously, it's been very useful in getting rid of Mubarak and mobilizing people around that. But how do you think it can be harnessed and utilized going forward in terms of what happens next in Egypt?
I had the opportunity to talk to several of the recent Tunisian ministers who were on a panel where they were introduced by their name, their title, and the number of hours they had been in office, which was interesting. But Sami Zawi, in particular, who was the Secretary of State, and I talked to him as the Secretary of State for Communications, and he got his back up. He said, no. In Tunisia, the old Secretary for Communications was responsible for stopping communications. I am the Secretary of State for Communications Technology. I'm here to support it. So one of the things we may see in these governments is a commitment to make these tools more directly accessible to their citizens in a less fettered way. The Tunisians are certainly planning on doing that. Whether the Egyptians do or not, I don't know, but I think we could all hope that that would happen.
And I can only say on Egypt, I can't think of a more important role for journalists than in this post-Mubarak time. They are going to be the check and balance on power. It is not predetermined what's going to happen now. It was a people's uprising, but whether it becomes a democratic revolution is going to be determined by holding those in power accountable. Journalists have such an important role to play in Egypt today, and they must be protected, not only in Egypt, but in the United States and around the world.
Well, thank you for joining Empire, and until next time.
To invest in a country that offers 100% and more tax deductions on R&D expenditures, please push the button. For more power to your global business, invest in Turkey.
They grew up as Americans, children of refugees who fled the war in Somalia. Yet now, some are returning to fight and die in a homeland they can barely remember. This is the story of young Somalis who have forsaken the American dream in pursuit of a jihadist ideology. What's turned them to this path? What's been the impact on their families back here in the US? And what can the American authorities do about it?
The Raghi Omar Report, at this time on Al Jazeera.
The times change. The instruments evolve. The battlegrounds shift.
This is America! Our country!
But the international struggle continues.
He was murdered!
Uncompromising, hard-hitting investigations.
I can't get no justice from no one in Jamaica.
People and power, at this time on Al Jazeera.
All the news, all the time. aljazeera.net/English.
Decoding the stories that shape our views.
Those images catapulted the story back into the headlines.
Everything that I thought would be easy was hard, and everything that I thought would be hard was easy.
From mainstream media to consumer-led advertising.
There are other options.
What's at the front line of global media?
This has been reported worldwide.
With a major media angle to it.
Comparing news and challenging views. The Listening Post, at this time on Al Jazeera.
They grew up as Americans, children of refugees who fled the war in Somalia. Yet now, some are returning to fight and die in a homeland they can barely remember. This is the story of young Somalis who have forsaken the American dream in pursuit of a jihadist ideology. What's turned them to this path? What's been the impact on their families back here in the US? And what can the American authorities do about it?
The Raghi Omar Report, at this time on Al Jazeera.
From the world to your phone. Al Jazeera Mobile.
Chaos in Libya, protesters burn down government buildings in Benghazi as a brutal crackdown goes on. Witnesses say more than 250 people are now dead. There are reports of government troops defecting. This is protesters